Good morning. It's a snowy Saturday here, and I thought I would take a moment to go over some of the details from the LinkedIn post I had yesterday. The one about the adoption of language around AI, machine learning, and data science in publicly traded company filings. So I mentioned in the post that I spent a little time digging through actual filings because I didn't believe how frequently they were being mentioned these days. And as I went through these, most of them being recent obviously, the trends were pretty apparent, right? I think there's a lot of real reference. There's some stuff that clearly people are trying to figure out and move towards with real investment. And then there's the window dressing. But what about the way it used to be before this stuff was so sexy? Before anybody even knew that they could double a multiple without even changing a single part of their business? Well, I thought, why don't we go back to the first mentions in the EDGAR data set of some of these key areas. So I thought, let's just stick with the three that I covered yesterday: artificial intelligence, data science, and machine learning. We could obviously include some other areas like statistical modeling, decision trees, any of the expert systems that might have been popular at one point. But to keep it simple and comparable going forward and backward, these three I thought would give us good ground to stand on for interpretation. So I have a little Jupyter Lab set up here, and I'll walk you through a couple of the first references to these areas in the EDGAR data set. So I'm just printing out some of the references here, and you'll see that some of these URLs are a little old and a little broken. But if we look at the first mentions of artificial intelligence in EDGAR, they actually come from a bank that was founded during the Civil War. So the First National Bank of Cincinnati was the predecessor to the First National Bank of Minneapolis, which later became the First Bank Systems Corporation, and you now today know as U.S. Bank or U.S. Bank Corp, depending on which industries you work in. This bank was working on underwriting systems for its loans, like its mortgages, way back when, right? Which in this case is 20 years ago. So if you look in their 10K, in 1993's financial year, so filed in 1994, they talk about developing and testing a laptop computer loan origination program and continuing to develop artificial intelligence underwriting software. This may seem pretty amazing today if you listen to the way people talk about underwriting being modernized by AI, but in reality, we've had algorithmic underwriting for a very long time. And while doing this with AI or modern data science practices might be different and often better, there's a reason we have things like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and it's because in truth, underwriting has been algorithmic, for better or worse, for a very long time. So first use of artificial intelligence wasn't a tech company, it was a boring old bank at the head of the Mississippi in Minneapolis. Kind of interesting, right? The next topic that we talked about is data science. And the first mentions of data science have to do with this gentleman. I believe his name is Dietrich. I'll get there in a second. So this guy, Dieter Geisbrecht, was apparently at Mohawk Data Science, which is a company that you've almost never heard of, or almost certainly never heard of. You may, however, have seen MDS, and I don't mean the pre-processing method. I mean a company in the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley, right, in Mountain View, right off the 101. There's a data recorder there, if I recall, or at least there was last time I was there, and it's labeled MDS. Now, MDS stood for Mohawk Data Sciences Corporation, and boy, did they have some interesting marketing material back then. Here is MDS in the data flow, FLO, way back when. I'll share a link to this PDF in the video, but you get a sense for it, right? They were a company doing data or decision science when the Cold War was still at its height, when computers looked like, well, I'll get there in a second. Computers looked like this. Probably looks more like your laundromat today than your server room. So MDS was a place that some executives had gone through, and some of the earliest mentions of data science in SEC filings simply have to do with the executives having a resume that includes having worked at this Mohawk Data Sciences Corp. Not a real mention of data science in the modern use that I think we're looking for. So if we go a little bit further down the list of results, we'll find that the first modern mention of data science is, somewhat unsurprisingly, Teradata. And Teradata in this case was referring to their MapReduce platform, right? So they were one of the first enterprise vendors to introduce a MapReduce platform once Google published its papers. And in this MapReduce product mention in their item 1 business description, see under item 1 here, business description, they talk about MapReduce as offering a powerful environment for developing and using data science-based analytics. Interesting, right? This was the first time a company talked about data science the way that we use it today in EDGAR filings. Last up, I'll go over machine learning. So machine learning actually has a history going back to 2000, even more recent than data science. And if we look for the first usage of machine learning, it's in a company called Canna, which now is a part of Verint. And Canna used machine learning, in particular Bayesian networks, which they go into somewhat painstaking detail describing here, to triage messages that came in from a customer support perspective. You may think Salesforce triage is fancy these days with some of its support for automatic classification of support requests or the like, but this little company here, Canna, was doing that 21 years ago, talking about it. Obviously, the dot-com bubble may have burst and set them back a little bit, and Bayesian networks may or may not have been able to scale, or they might not have had enough data at the time and adoption due to things like broadband or mobile access, but they were right on, right? They were using a machine learning algorithm to classify and triage customer support requests as they came in 21 years ago. What do you think would have happened if you'd invested in a company like this back then? Would have been pretty interesting, right? So I hope to bring you a little bit more analysis like this, right? Looking at the technical or financial information that we can find when we take almost a historical or anthropological lens to this data set. I think it'll be fun. So I hope you'll follow along, and we'll all learn along the way. See you next time.